The courthouse doors burst open with such force that the bailiff's coffee mug shattered against the floor. 5 Marines in dress blues marched down the center aisle, their synchronized footsteps echoing like thunder through the stunned silence. My ex-husband Marcus went white as a sheet, his expensive lawyer's mouth hanging open in disbelief. The judge's gavel froze mid-air as Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez approached the bench, holding a single document that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But let me back up, because 30 minutes earlier, Marcus thought he was about to steal my house right out from under me. He had no idea that the retired Marine living next door had been watching everything unfold, and that the one piece of paper I'd been hiding would bring the full weight of military justice crashing down on his fraudulent scheme. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered with the kind of crisp efficiency that should have warned me trouble was coming. I was standing in my kitchen in Riverside, North Carolina, still in my pajamas and fuzzy slippers, when the postal worker knocked. The return address made my blood freeze. Morrison Associates Legal Firm. My maiden name stared back at me from the sender's line, but I'd been Rachel Morrison for exactly 3 months since my divorce was finalized. Seeing it again felt like a slap across the face. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope, coffee growing cold on the counter. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but certain phrases jumped out like neon signs in the darkness. Fraudulent transfer of marital property, seeking immediate possession, and the one that made my knees buckle. Plaintiff demands return of residential property located at 1247 Oak Ridge Drive. My house. Marcus was suing me for my house. I sank into the kitchen chair where I'd eaten countless breakfasts alone during our marriage, where I'd cried over his empty promises, where I'd finally found the strength to file for divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was now trying to take the one place where I discovered my own worth. The legal papers claimed that the house had been purchased with premarital assets, and that the divorce decree had been obtained through misrepresentation of financial circumstances. None of it was true, but looking at the official letterhead and precise legal language, I felt the familiar knot of fear that Marcus had spent 8 years perfecting in my stomach. He'd always been skilled at making me doubt reality, at twisting facts until I questioned my own memory. Now he was doing it through lawyers and court documents. The knock on my front door made me jump so violently that the legal papers scattered across the linoleum floor. Through the window, I could see my next-door neighbor, Colonel Thomas Bradley, standing on my porch with a concerned expression on his weathered face. Tom was 72 years old, a retired Marine who'd moved to Riverside after his wife passed away 3 years ago. We'd developed an easy friendship over garden fences and borrowed cups of sugar, but I'd been too embarrassed to tell him much about my divorce. "Rachel?" His gravelly voice called through the door. "Everything all right over there?" Saw the postal truck and thought I heard some distress. I wiped my eyes quickly and opened the door, trying to compose myself. Tom stood there in his perfectly pressed khakis and Marine Corps t-shirt, his silver hair still cut in military precision, despite his retirement. His blue eyes, sharp as laser sights, immediately took in my tear-stained face and the legal papers visible on the floor behind me. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded respect from troops in 3 different war zones. When I didn't answer immediately, he stepped closer, concern evident in every line of his face. "Rachel, talk to me." "It's Marcus," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "My ex-husband. He's suing me for the house." Tom's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering over the coast. "The house you've been living in for 6 years? The one you fought to keep in the divorce?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Tom stepped inside without invitation, his presence immediately making the small entryway feel safer somehow. He bent down and gathered the scattered legal documents with the same precision he probably once used to handle classified military papers. "May I?" he asked, holding up the lawsuit. I nodded again, watching as his eyes moved methodically across each page. His jaw tightened progressively with each paragraph, and by the time he reached the end, his hands were clenched into fists around the papers. "This is garbage," he said flatly. "Pure, unadulterated garbage designed to intimidate you into settling." "But what if he's right?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. What if I don't remember the financial details correctly? What if the house really was bought with his money and I just convinced myself otherwise? Tom set the papers down on my kitchen table and turned to face me fully, his military bearing making him seem taller than his actual 6 feet. Rachel, look at me. How long have we been neighbors? 2 years, I replied, confused by the question. In those 2 years, have I ever known you to lie? To exaggerate? To remember things incorrectly when it mattered? I shook my head slowly. You've told me about working 2 jobs to save for the down payment on this place. You've mentioned the weekend hours you put in at the graphic design firm, the freelance projects you took on evenings and weekends. You've talked about how proud you were to finally have something that was truly yours. His voice grew gentler, but no less firm. Now, does that sound like someone who would forget whether she bought her own house? The knot in my stomach began to loosen slightly. Tom was right. I did remember. I remembered every sacrifice, every extra shift, every dollar saved in mason jars hidden from Marcus, because he had a tendency to borrow money for his business ventures that never seemed to pan out. There's something else, Tom said, settling into the chair across from me. Something about this lawsuit that doesn't smell right. The timing, the claims, even the law firm he's using. Morrison Associates. That's his name, isn't it? Yes, but he's not a lawyer. He sells insurance. Exactly. So either he's hired family to represent him, or... Tom paused, thinking. Or he's using a firm that's willing to file frivolous lawsuits based on weak evidence. Either way, this stinks of desperation. I felt a small spark of hope kindle in my chest. You really think he's just trying to scare me? I think he's trying to do more than scare you. I think he's trying to force you into a settlement because he knows he can't win in court. Tom leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone I imagined he'd use to brief soldiers before difficult missions. The question is, what's driving this desperation? What's changed in his life that makes him willing to risk perjury charges by filing false claims? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. The name on the screen made my stomach lurch. Marcus Morrison. The message was short but loaded with the familiar manipulation tactics I knew so well. Saw you got the papers. This doesn't have to be ugly, Rach. Call me and we can work something out. You know I still care about you. Tom saw my face change and held out his hand. May I? I handed him the phone, watching as his expression shifted from concern to disgust. Classic intimidation followed by false intimacy. He's trying to make you think he's doing you a favor by offering to work something out. Tom set the phone down firmly. Don't respond to that. But what if he takes my silence as defiance? What if it makes him angrier? Rachel, listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for managing his emotions anymore. You are not married to him. You don't owe him responses, explanations, or anything else. Tom's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. What you need now is a good lawyer and a clear understanding of exactly what evidence you have to prove your ownership of this house. The front door chimed again, and I looked through the window to see Dorothy Kim from 3 houses down walking up my front path. Mrs. Kim was 78 years old, a tiny Korean woman whose late husband had served in the Korean War. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd survived real hardship, and despite our language barrier, we'd developed a warm relationship through shared garden work and her amazing kimchi recipes. Rachel, honey, she called as I opened the door. I see papers on ground earlier. Look like trouble. You okay? Tom stood up as Mrs. Kim entered, both of them recognizing something in each other that civilian neighbors might miss. Military families had a way of identifying each other across generational and cultural lines. Mrs. Kim, this is my neighbor, Tom Bradley. Tom, this is Dorothy Kim. Ma'am, Tom nodded respectfully. Your husband served? Korean War, 1951 to 1953. Sergeant First Class. Her pride was evident, despite her broken English. He tell me always, when neighbor have trouble, you help. Community is family. I found myself tearing up again, but this time from gratitude rather than fear. In less than an hour, I'd gone from feeling completely alone and overwhelmed to having two allies who seemed genuinely invested in helping me fight this battle. "Mrs. Kim," Tom said thoughtfully, "have you noticed any unusual activity at Rachel's house over the past few years? People coming and going, anyone claiming to have ownership or rights to the property?" Mrs. Kim's eyes sharpened with understanding. "You mean the bad husband? He come around maybe 6-7 times since divorce. Always when Rachel at work. He try key, it no work. He look in windows, walk around like he own place." Her accent thickened with disapproval. "Last week, he come with lady. Blonde lady, very fancy clothes. They take pictures of house, measure yard, very suspicious." This was news to me, and the violation felt like ice water in my veins. "Marcus has been coming here? While I'm at work?" "I take pictures," Mrs. Kim announced matter-of-factly, pulling out an ancient flip phone.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"My grandson teach me. Evidence, he say. Always need evidence." Tom's eyes lit up with approval. "Mrs. Kim, you might have just given us exactly what we need. Rachel, do you have a copy of your deed? Property purchase documents? Mortgage papers?" "Everything's in my filing cabinet upstairs. I keep all important documents organized." It was a habit I'd developed during my marriage, partly because Marcus was so disorganized, and partly because I'd learned not to trust him with anything important. Good. What we need to do now is build a timeline and gather evidence. Mrs. Kim's photos are a start, but we need to document everything. When you bought the house, where the money came from, what Marcus's financial situation was at the time, and what it is now. Tom stood up, suddenly energized with purpose. "This feels like something I've handled before." "You've dealt with property disputes?" I asked, confused. "Not exactly. But I've dealt with bullies who thought they could intimidate people through official-looking paperwork and legal threats. The principles are the same. Gather evidence, understand your opponent's weaknesses, and strike back with overwhelming force when the time is right." Mrs. Kim nodded approvingly. "In Korea, my husband say, best defense is good offense. You no wait for enemy to choose battleground. You choose." Looking at these two unlikely allies in my kitchen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sense that I wasn't facing this alone. Tom's military bearing and Mrs. Kim's survivor instincts complemented each other perfectly, and both seemed genuinely outraged on my behalf. "What's our first step?" I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Tom smiled, and for the first time I could see the commanding officer he must have been. "First, we gather intelligence. Every document, every photo, every witness statement we can get our hands on. Then we figure out what Marcus is really after, and why he thinks he can get it through intimidation." "And then?" I pressed. "Then we show him what happens when you mess with Marines and their neighbors." Mrs. Kim cackled with delight. "I like this plan. We show bad husband what real fight look like." As I led them upstairs to my filing cabinet, I realized that in the span of one morning, everything had changed. Marcus might have started this fight, thinking he was dealing with the same frightened, isolated woman he'd controlled for 8 years. But he had no idea that his former wife now had a retired Marine colonel and a Korean War veteran's widow in her corner. The legal papers that had seemed so terrifying an hour ago now felt like nothing more than the opening move in a game where Marcus had seriously underestimated his opponents. As Tom began examining my property documents with the methodical precision of someone trained to spot inconsistencies, and Mrs. Kim downloaded photos from her ancient phone, I felt a fierce smile cross my face. Marcus wanted a fight for my house. He was about to get one he'd never forget. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me grateful to live in North Carolina. Instead, I found myself staring at my coffee cup, wondering if this would be one of the last mornings I'd spend in my own kitchen. Tom had arrived at 7 sharp, carrying a manila folder thick with notes, and what appeared to be a military-issue laptop that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. "Sleep well?" he asked, though his knowing look suggested he already knew the answer. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied, gesturing to the legal documents still spread across my kitchen table like evidence of a crime scene. Mrs. Kim knocked on the back door precisely at 7:15, carrying a thermos of coffee that smelled like heaven, and a small notebook covered in careful handwriting. "I make list," she announced, settling into what had apparently become her designated chair. "All times I see bad husband. What he do? Who he with?" Tom opened his laptop with practiced efficiency. "I spent some time last night doing research on Marcus Morrison. What I found is interesting." His tone carried the same weight I imagined he'd used when briefing commanding officers about enemy movements. "What kind of interesting?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The kind that explains why he's suddenly interested in a house he showed no interest in during your divorce proceedings." Tom turned the laptop screen toward me, displaying what appeared to be a detailed background report. "Marcus has been busy since your separation." The screen showed a series of business registrations, loan applications, and financial records that made my head spin. But Tom's methodical explanation began to paint a disturbing picture. Marcus had started 3 different businesses in the 18 months since we'd separated, each one failing within 6 months. He'd taken out substantial loans using his income from the insurance agency as collateral, but the agency itself was apparently struggling due to several client complaints and a pending investigation from the state insurance commission. "He's broke," I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. "Worse than broke. He's facing financial ruin and potentially criminal charges for insurance fraud." Tom pulled up another document. "This is where it gets particularly interesting. 3 months ago, he applied for a business loan using this address as collateral." "My address, my house." "But he can't do that. The house is mine. The divorce decree clearly states, he told the bank you were separated but not divorced, and that the property was marital assets." Tom's voice was grim. "When the bank ran a credit check on the property, they discovered the divorce was finalized and the house was solely in your name. They denied the loan, but not before Marcus had already spent money he didn't have based on the expectation of getting it." Mrs. Kim leaned forward, her small hands clenched into fists. "So he lied to bank, then sue Rachel to make lie true?" "Exactly. This lawsuit isn't about property rights or forgotten agreements. It's about a desperate man trying to avoid bankruptcy and possible prison time by stealing his ex-wife's house." The revelation should have made me angrier, but instead I felt an odd sense of relief. Marcus's betrayal wasn't personal, wasn't about love or marriage or our shared history. It was simply greed and desperation, which somehow made it easier to fight. "There's more," Tom continued, pulling up another screen. "The blonde woman Mrs. Kim saw him with last week? That's Vanessa Sterling, a real estate agent from Charlotte. She specializes in quick property flips and cash sales. They planning to sell my house," Mrs. Kim said flatly. "Before you even know what's happening." I felt the ground shift beneath me again. This wasn't just about Marcus trying to steal my home. It was about him planning to profit from it immediately. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. "How did you find all this out?" I asked Tom, genuinely amazed at the depth of information he'd gathered in less than 24 hours. Tom's smile was slightly predatory. 30 years in military intelligence teaches you a few things about research. Plus, I have friends in various agencies who owe me favors. He closed the laptop, but what we have now is just background. What we need is evidence that will hold up in court. "I have idea," Mrs. Kim announced, pulling out her ancient phone. "You remember I take pictures of bad husband and fancy lady?" She scrolled through dozens of photos with the patience of someone who'd clearly mastered technology despite her age. The images she showed us were remarkably clear for such an old phone. Marcus and Vanessa Sterling walking around my property, measuring windows, taking notes, and in one particularly damaging shot, Vanessa holding what appeared to be a real estate assessment form. "Mrs. Kim, you're brilliant," Tom said with genuine admiration. "These photos prove premeditation. They were planning to sell before the lawsuit was even filed." "But is that illegal?" I asked, still trying to process the magnitude of their scheme. It's fraud. Marcus filed a lawsuit claiming historical ownership rights while simultaneously planning to sell property he knew wasn't his. Tom stood up, pacing the small kitchen with barely contained energy. This gives us ammunition, but we need more. We need to understand their timeline and catch them in additional lies. What you want me to do? Mrs. Kim asked, clearly ready for whatever mission Tom might assign. Keep watching, keep photographing, but be careful. If they realize they're being observed, they might accelerate their timeline or try to intimidate you. Mrs. Kim snorted dismissively. I survive war, I survive immigration, I survive American bureaucracy. I know afraid of bad husband and his fancy girlfriend. I found myself laughing despite everything. Mrs. Kim's fearless attitude was infectious, and Tom's military confidence made the whole situation feel manageable rather than overwhelming. What about me? I asked. What's my role in this intelligence gathering? Tom sat back down, his expression becoming serious. Your job is to act completely normal while we build our case. Don't respond to Marcus's texts or calls. Don't give any indication that you know about his financial problems or his plans with the real estate agent. Let him think his intimidation tactics are working. That's going to be hard. He knows how to get under my skin. Which is exactly why you're going to practice not letting him. Tom's voice took on the tone of a drill instructor. Every time he contacts you, every time you feel that familiar fear or doubt, you're going to remember that we know the truth. He's not a successful businessman trying to reclaim rightful property. He's a failing con artist trying to steal from his ex-wife to avoid bankruptcy. Mrs. Kim nodded approvingly. In war, best weapon is enemy not knowing you have weapon. We let him think he winning while we prepare surprise. The three of us spent the next hour creating what Tom called an intelligence gathering protocol. Mrs. Kim would continue her surveillance, documenting any visits to my property or suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Tom would use his contacts to dig deeper into Marcus's financial situation and the backgrounds of his legal team. I would maintain detailed records of all communication attempts and begin gathering character witnesses who could testify about my ownership of the house and Marcus's absence from my life since the divorce. There's one more thing, Tom said as we wrapped up our planning session. We need to understand who Morrison and Associates really are. A legitimate law firm wouldn't file a lawsuit this week unless they had a compelling reason. What kind of reason? I asked. Either they're being lied to by their client, or they're complicit in the fraud. Either way, we need to know which. Tom made a note in his folder. I'm going to make some calls to legal contacts. If Morrison and Associates has a reputation for questionable practices, that's something we can use. After Tom and Mrs. Kim left, I found myself alone with the silence of my house and the weight of everything we'd discovered. The Marcus I'd been married to was selfish and manipulative, but this level of calculated deception felt like meeting a stranger. The man planning to steal and sell my house bore little resemblance to the person who'd once promised to love and protect me. My phone buzzed again with another text from Marcus. Rachel, you're being stubborn about this. My lawyers are confident, but I'd rather settle this between us. Coffee tomorrow? For old time's sake? Following Tom's advice, I deleted the message without responding. But the familiar manipulation tactics still triggered a wave of anxiety that took several deep breaths to overcome. Marcus was trying to recreate the dynamic of our marriage, where his persistence would eventually wear down my resistance until I gave him whatever he wanted. Not this time. I spent the afternoon organizing every document related to my house purchase. The paper trail was extensive and clear. My employment records showing the overtime hours I'd worked to save for the down payment, bank statements documenting the gradual accumulation of funds in my private savings account, the mortgage application filled out solely in my name, and the deed transfer with only my signature. But as I reviewed the documents, I began to notice details I'd forgotten. Marcus had been notably absent during most of the house buying process. He'd claimed to be too busy with work to attend showings, inspections, or even the closing. At the time, I'd been hurt by his lack of interest. Now I realized his absence had been deliberate. It would be difficult to claim ownership of a purchase he'd had no involvement in. That evening, Tom returned with news that confirmed our worst suspicions. Morrison Associates was indeed a family firm. Marcus's cousin Derek Morrison was a practicing attorney, but one with a questionable reputation and several ethics violations on his record. The firm specialized in intimidation lawsuits designed to force quick settlements rather than win in court. "They're counting on you being too scared or too poor to fight back," Tom explained over dinner at my kitchen table. "It's a common scam. File official-looking papers, make threatening demands, and hope the victim settles for whatever they can get, rather than face a lengthy legal battle. But what if I can't afford to fight them in court?" The question that had been haunting me all day finally surfaced. "That's where things get interesting," Tom said with a slight smile. "I made another call today, to an old Marine buddy who's now practicing law in Raleigh. Patricia Hayes. She specializes in defending against frivolous lawsuits, and she's very interested in your case." "I can't afford a lawyer, Tom. Not one good enough to fight Marcus's family firm. Patricia takes some cases pro bono when they involve clear attempts to defraud military families or their neighbors. She considers it a public service." Tom's smile widened. "I may have mentioned that you're under the protection of a retired Marine colonel who considers this lawsuit a personal insult." I felt tears prick my eyes, but for the first time in days, they were tears of gratitude rather than fear. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, looking out my kitchen window toward his own house. "My wife Margaret and I were married for 42 years. When she got sick, I watched her fight cancer with more courage than I'd seen in 3 decades of military service. You know what her biggest fear was? Not dying, but the thought that some scam artist might take advantage of me after she was gone." He turned back to me, his blue eyes intense with memory. "Margaret made me promise to look out for neighbors, especially women living alone. She said predators target people they think are isolated and vulnerable." His voice grew firm. "You're not isolated, Rachel. You're not vulnerable. And Marcus Morrison is about to learn what happens when he picks on someone under Marine protection." The next morning brought our first real test. I was getting ready for work when a black sedan pulled into my driveway. 2 men in expensive suits got out, one carrying a briefcase and the other holding what appeared to be legal documents. From my upstairs window, I could see Tom emerge from his garage workshop, ostensibly to water his front garden, but actually positioning himself to observe and intervene if necessary. Mrs. Kim appeared on her front porch, phone in hand, ready to document whatever was about to happen. The doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of people who expected immediate compliance. When I opened the door, the older of the 2 men spoke without preamble. "Ms. Morrison? I'm Derek Morrison, representing my client Marcus Morrison in the property dispute regarding this residence. This is my associate, Paul Chen. We're here to conduct a preliminary assessment of the property in question." "I'm sorry, but you don't have permission to enter my property or conduct any kind of assessment," I replied, grateful that my voice sounded steadier than I felt. Derek Morrison's smile was coldly professional. "Actually, as part of the pending litigation, we have the right to inspect the property that my client has a legitimate claim to. I'd advise you not to interfere with the legal process. I'd advise you to provide a court order authorizing such an inspection." Tom's voice cut across the morning air as he approached my front porch. "Otherwise, you're trespassing on private property." Derek Morrison turned to assess this new threat, and I watched his expression change as he took in Tom's bearing and obvious military background. "And you are?" "Colonel Thomas Bradley, United States Marine Corps, retired. Ms. Morrison's neighbor and friend." Tom's voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Do you have a court order?" "That's not necessary for a preliminary." "Do you have a court order?" Tom repeated, stepping closer. Derek Morrison exchanged glances with his associate, clearly recalculating the situation. "We'll be back with proper documentation." "You do that," Tom replied pleasantly. "And next time, I'd suggest calling ahead. Ms. Morrison is under no obligation to accommodate unscheduled visits from opposing counsel." As the black sedan pulled away, I realized I was shaking with adrenaline rather than fear. For the first time in my 8-year marriage and subsequent divorce, Someone had stood up to Marcus's intimidation tactics and won. How did I do? I asked Tom, who was still watching the car disappear down Oak Ridge Drive. Outstanding. You were polite but firm, you didn't let them inside, and you didn't give them any information they could use against you. He turned to me with approval. You're learning to fight back, Rachel. Marcus is going to be very surprised by the woman he's dealing with now. Mrs. Kim appeared at my side, slightly out of breath from hurrying across the yards. I get pictures of car, license plate, everything. These men, they have court order? No court order, Tom confirmed, which means they were here on a fishing expedition, trying to intimidate Rachel into giving them information or access they're not legally entitled to. Fishing expedition that failed, I added, surprised by the satisfaction in my own voice. As I drove to work that morning, I found myself thinking about the difference between the woman who'd opened that lawsuit letter 2 days ago and the person who'd just faced down Marcus's legal team. The change wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was real. I wasn't the same frightened, isolated woman Marcus had counted on manipulating. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was starting to believe that not only could I fight Marcus's fraudulent lawsuit, I could win. Patricia Hayes arrived at my house 3 days later, driving a pickup truck that had seen better decades and wearing jeans that suggested she spent more time on horse farms than in courtrooms. Her handshake could have cracked walnuts, and her smile held the kind of mischief that made opposing counsel nervous. Tom had warned me she was unconventional, but I hadn't expected someone who looked like she could brand cattle and argue constitutional law with equal expertise. So you're the neighbor who's got Marcus Morrison's panties in a twist, she said, settling into my kitchen with the casual confidence of someone who'd never met a fight she couldn't win. Tom's told me quite a story. I hope you don't mind meeting here instead of an office, I began, but Patricia waved off my concern. Honey, I do my best work in kitchens. Something about sitting around a table where people actually live makes the truth come out faster. She pulled out a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had survived several wars. Besides, I wanted to see this house that's got everyone so worked up. Mrs. Kim appeared at the back door carrying a plate of homemade cookies and wearing an expression of intense curiosity. She'd clearly been watching for Patricia's arrival and wasn't about to miss the meeting where we planned our counterattack. Mrs. Kim, this is Patricia Hayes, the attorney Tom told us about, I introduced them. You the lawyer who make bad people pay? Mrs. Kim asked directly, studying Patricia with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd learned to judge character quickly. When they deserve it, Patricia replied, accepting a cookie with obvious appreciation. And from what Tom's told me, Marcus Morrison deserves it in spades. Tom arrived precisely on time, carrying another folder of research and looking like he'd spent the morning conducting surveillance operations. Patricia, good to see you again. Rachel, we need to talk about what happened yesterday, after you left for work. My stomach clenched. What happened? Derek Morrison came back with a court order for property inspection. I was in my workshop when I saw him and 2 other men walking around your house, taking measurements and photographs. Tom's expression was grim. They spent about an hour documenting everything. The condition of the exterior, the landscaping, even the neighbor proximity for property value assessment. Patricia looked up sharply from the legal documents she'd been reviewing. They had a legitimate court order? Signed by Judge Hamilton at Cumberland County Superior Court. I took photos of the order and the men conducting the inspection. Tom pulled out his phone, showing images of the legal team measuring my front porch and photographing my garden. Judge Hamilton, Patricia mused, making a note. He's usually pretty careful about authorizing property inspections in contested cases. Derek Morrison must have presented compelling evidence of potential property damage or hidden assets. What kind of evidence? I asked, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety forming in my chest. The kind he probably made up, Patricia replied matter-of-factly. But that's actually good news for us. The more lies they tell the court, the more ammunition we have when we prove they're lying. Mrs. Kim leaned forward with interest. How we prove? Patricia's smile turned predatory. By letting them dig their own grave. Every false claim they make, Every piece of fraudulent evidence they present, every lie they tell under oath, becomes another nail in their coffin. She spread several documents across my kitchen table. But first, we need to build our own case so thoroughly that even a sympathetic judge would have no choice but to rule in our favor. What have you found so far? Tom asked, settling into strategy mode. Enough to make this interesting. Marcus Morrison isn't just financially desperate, he's criminally exposed. The insurance fraud investigation Tom uncovered is moving forward, and the state attorney general's office is taking it seriously. Patricia pulled out a thick file. But here's where it gets really good. The loan applications he filed using Rachel's house as collateral weren't just denied, they were flagged as potentially fraudulent by the banking commission. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with disbelief. He's being investigated by multiple agencies? 3 agencies, actually. Insurance fraud, banking fraud, and potential tax evasion related to his failed businesses. Patricia's eyes gleamed with professional satisfaction. Marcus Morrison is looking at serious jail time unless he can pay substantial fines and restitution. Hence the desperate grab for your house. Tom whistled low. No wonder he's pulling out all the stops. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about avoiding prison. Which makes him dangerous, Patricia warned, her tone becoming serious. Desperate people make unpredictable choices. We need to be prepared for him to escalate beyond legal intimidation. Mrs. Kim nodded grimly. I keep watching. Yesterday, fancy girlfriend come by again, but this time with different man. Not bad husband. Older man, expensive car. Patricia and Tom exchanged glances. Did you get photos? Tom asked. Mrs. Kim proudly displayed her phone, showing clear images of Vanessa Sterling talking with a silver-haired man in a Mercedes sedan. They talk for a long time, look at house, point at different things. That's probably a property appraiser or potential buyer, Patricia said, studying the photos. They're moving fast, which suggests they're confident about winning the lawsuit, or they're planning to force a settlement. Can they do that? I asked. Force me to settle? They can try, but they picked the wrong opponent this time. Patricia's smile was fierce. See, what Marcus doesn't know is that I've been waiting for a case exactly like this. Insurance fraud, property theft, targeting a military family's neighbor? This hits every button that makes me righteously angry. Tom leaned back in his chair, looking satisfied. I had a feeling you'd see it that way. Oh, I see it that way and then some. Marcus Morrison thinks he's playing hardball with a small-town divorce case. What he's actually done is declare war on someone with 30 years of experience in military justice and a very low tolerance for bullies. Patricia began organizing documents with military precision. Here's what we're going to do. She laid out a strategy that was both comprehensive and elegant in its simplicity. First, we would document every false claim in Marcus's lawsuit with contradictory evidence. Then, we would file countersuits for harassment, fraud, and attempted theft. Finally, we would present everything to the court in a way that made Marcus's criminal exposure impossible to ignore. The key is timing, Patricia explained. We let them present their case first, let them commit to their lies under oath, and then we systematically destroy every claim with documentation they didn't know we had. What kind of documentation? I asked. Tom opened his laptop and turned it toward us. Bank records showing exactly where your down payment money came from, employment records proving you worked the overtime hours to save it, and telephone records showing Marcus was notably absent during the entire house buying process. How did you get telephone records? I asked, amazed. I still have friends in intelligence who understand the importance of supporting fellow Marines and their neighbors, Tom replied with a slight smile. Amazing what you can discover when you know where to look and have the proper authorization. Patricia nodded approvingly. Tom's research gives us the foundation, but we need more. We need witness testimony from people who can confirm your sole ownership of this house and Marcus's absence from your life since the divorce. I talked to neighbors, Mrs. Kim volunteered immediately. Everyone on street know Rachel live here alone, take care of house herself, make garden beautiful. Bad husband, never here, never help with anything. Perfect. Community testimony is powerful evidence of actual residence and ownership. Patricia made notes as she spoke. What about your workplace? People who can testify about the overtime hours you worked to save for the house? My former supervisor at the graphic design firm, several coworkers who covered for me when I was house hunting, even clients who had to reschedule meetings because I was dealing with mortgage paperwork. The memories were flooding back as I spoke. Marcus complained constantly about how much time I was spending on house stuff instead of paying attention to him. Did he ever contribute financially to the purchase? Patricia asked. He actively discouraged it. Said I was being foolish buying a house when we could rent forever and avoid the responsibility. I felt a familiar flash of anger at the memory. He called it my little domesticity project and said I'd regret tying up so much money in property. Tom's expression darkened. So he opposed the purchase, didn't contribute to it, wasn't involved in the process, and now claims ownership rights? That's exactly what makes this attempted fraud so blatant, Patricia said with satisfaction. No reasonable person could look at this evidence and conclude Marcus has any legitimate claim to your property. Then why is he bothering with the lawsuit? I asked. Because he's counting on you not having access to good legal representation or the resources to fight back effectively. Patricia's voice grew hard. It's a classic intimidation tactic. File official-looking papers, make scary legal threats, and hope the victim settles out of fear rather than fighting in court. Mrs. Kim snorted dismissively. He picked wrong neighbor to intimidate. He certainly did. But we need to be strategic about how we respond. Going in guns blazing might feel satisfying, but it won't be as effective as a carefully planned demolition of his case. Patricia pulled out a calendar and began making notes. The court date is 3 weeks away. That gives us time to gather witnesses, organize evidence, and prepare for what I expect will be a very short trial. Short? I asked. Honey, when you have this much evidence of fraud, and the opposing counsel is Derek Morrison, known for cutting corners and hoping nobody notices, the case pretty much argues itself. Patricia's confidence was infectious. The challenge won't be winning. It'll be making sure Marcus faces appropriate consequences for attempting to steal your house. Tom leaned forward with interest. What kind of consequences? Criminal charges for fraud, ethics violations for Derek Morrison, and civil penalties that could include paying Rachel's legal fees and damages for harassment and attempted theft. Patricia's smile was particularly satisfying. By the time we're done, Marcus Morrison will wish he'd stuck to regular insurance fraud instead of branching out into property theft. Over the next hour, we developed what Patricia called our evidence matrix. Every claim in Marcus's lawsuit would be matched with contradictory documentation, witness testimony, or both. Mrs. Kim's surveillance photos would establish premeditation and conspiracy with the real estate agent. Tom's financial research would demonstrate Marcus's desperate circumstances and fraudulent intentions. My employment and banking records would prove sole ownership and funding of the house purchase. There's one more element we need to discuss, Patricia said as we wrapped up our planning session. Marcus's criminal exposure makes him unpredictable. Desperate people sometimes escalate to intimidation or worse when legal tactics fail. You think he might try something physical? Tom asked, his military alertness suddenly heightened. I think he might try anything if he's facing prison time and bankruptcy. Rachel, I want you to be extra careful about personal security. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. Keep your doors locked, and trust your instincts if anything feels wrong. Mrs. Kim nodded emphatically. I watch house all time anyway. Bad husband come around again? I call police immediately. Actually, Tom said thoughtfully, I think it's time to bring in some additional security. I know some Marines who are between deployments and wouldn't mind earning some extra money keeping an eye on things. Is that really necessary? I asked, though the idea was more comforting than I wanted to admit. Rachel, you're about to cost Marcus Morrison his freedom and his financial future. That makes you a threat he might decide to eliminate. Patricia's bluntness was sobering. Better to have protection you don't need than to need protection you don't have. As the meeting broke up and everyone headed home, I found myself standing in my kitchen, looking around with new eyes. This wasn't just the house I'd worked so hard to buy and had fought to keep in my divorce. It was the battlefield where I was about to prove that I was no longer the frightened, isolated woman Marcus thought he could intimidate. That evening, Tom returned with two men who looked like they could bench press small cars and spoke with the same crisp authority that marked career military personnel. Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez was compact and intense, with eyes that seemed to catalog potential threats automatically. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen was taller and quieter, but something in his stillness suggested explosive capability when necessary. Elena and Mike are between deployments and happy to help out a neighbor, Tom explained. They'll be taking shifts, keeping an eye on the house and making sure you're safe. I appreciate this, but I can't afford to pay private security, I began. Elena held up a hand to stop me. Ma'am, with respect, this isn't about money. This is about taking care of our own. Tom's told us the situation, and frankly, we're looking forward to discouraging anyone who might be thinking about intimidating a Marine's neighbor. Mike nodded agreement. Besides, it's been too quiet around here lately. We could use some excitement. I found myself laughing despite the seriousness of the situation. You consider protecting me from my ex-husband? Excitement. Ma'am, we consider protecting anyone from fraud and intimidation exactly the kind of mission we signed up for, Elena replied seriously. Some fights are worth having, and this is definitely one of them. As the three Marines discussed security protocols and shift schedules, I realized that what had started as a desperate legal defense had transformed into something much larger. I wasn't just fighting Marcus's fraudulent lawsuit anymore. I was part of a community that had decided my battle was worth winning, and they were bringing resources and expertise I'd never imagined having access to. The next morning brought our first test of the new security arrangements. I was getting ready for work when Elena, who was on the morning shift, knocked on my door with controlled urgency. Rachel, we've got movement. Black sedan just pulled up across the street, same one from the previous visits. Two men inside, they've been sitting there for 20 minutes just watching your house. I looked through the window and recognized Derek Morrison's car, but this time it wasn't parked in my driveway. Instead, it was positioned where the occupants could observe my house without technically trespassing. What do they think they're accomplishing? I asked. Intimidation. They want you to know you're being watched, that they're not going away. Elena's expression was professionally neutral, but I could sense the coiled tension beneath her calm demeanor. Question is, do we let them sit there or do we send a message? Before I could answer, Tom emerged from his house and walked casually toward the sedan. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who feared nothing the car's occupants might represent. As he approached the driver's side window, Derek Morrison clearly recognized him and started the engine. But instead of driving away immediately, Derek rolled down his window for what appeared to be a brief but intense conversation with Tom. From my kitchen window, I could see Tom's posture remain relaxed and conversational, but whatever he said made Derek Morrison's face go pale before he quickly drove away. Tom returned to my house with a satisfied expression. They won't be doing that again. What did you say to them? Elena asked with professional curiosity. I mentioned that surveilling private residences without proper authorization might be construed as stalking, which is a felony in North Carolina. I also suggested that Marines tend to take a dim view of people who intimidate their neighbors, and that continued observation might result in them being observed in return by individuals with considerably more training and significantly less patience. Elena's smile was fierce with approval. Diplomatic but effective. Always the best approach when dealing with bullies. Give them a face-saving way to back down while making it clear that escalation would be unwise. Tom checked his watch. Rachel, you should get to work. Elena will maintain perimeter security, and I'll coordinate with Mrs. Kim on monitoring any further activity. As I drove to work, I realized that Marcus's intimidation tactics were already backfiring. Instead of making me feel isolated and vulnerable, his surveillance had triggered a protective response from people who clearly took threats against their community seriously. Every attempt he made to scare me was only strengthening the resolve of my unexpected allies, For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I found myself almost looking forward to the court date. Marcus thought he was fighting a frightened woman with limited resources. Instead, he was about to face a coalition of Marines, lawyers, and neighbors who had turned his property theft attempt into a personal mission. The man who'd spent 8 years convincing me I was weak and helpless was about to discover exactly how wrong he'd been about everything. The week before the court hearing brought developments that none of us had anticipated. I was having coffee with Patricia on Saturday morning when Elena knocked on my door with an expression that immediately put me on high alert. She carried herself differently than usual, with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested serious news. "Rachel, we need to talk." "All of us." Elena glanced toward Tom's house where I could see him working in his garage. "There's been a development that changes everything." Within minutes, our entire team had assembled in my living room. Mrs. Kim arrived carrying her ever-present notebook and phone, Tom brought his research files, and Patricia had her legal briefcase. Elena waited until everyone was settled before delivering news that sent shockwaves through our carefully planned strategy. "I got a call this morning from a contact at Camp Mackenzie. They've been conducting a routine security review of personnel with outstanding legal issues, and Marcus Morrison's name appeared on their list." Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "Turns out our boy Marcus has been claiming military service to enhance his insurance business credibility." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that suggested someone was about to face serious consequences for their poor life choices. "What kind of military service?" Patricia asked, her legal mind immediately grasping the implications. According to his business website and several client testimonials, Marcus Morrison served as a Marine Corps logistics specialist from 2008 to 2012, deployed twice to Afghanistan, and received commendations for exceptional service under combat conditions. Elena's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes burned with outrage. "Problem is, there's no record of anyone named Marcus Morrison ever serving in any branch of the military." Mrs. Kim looked confused. "He pretend to be soldier?" "He's been pretending to be a Marine," Tom corrected, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Using fake military service to gain client trust and business credibility." Patricia was already taking notes, her expression shifting into what I was learning to recognize as her courtroom battle mode. Stolen valor claims are federal felonies. If he's been using fake military credentials for business purposes, he's looking at significant prison time. "How did this come to light?" I asked, still processing the magnitude of Marcus's deception. Elena's smile was grim with satisfaction. "When I mentioned to my commanding officer that we were helping protect a neighbor from harassment by someone named Marcus Morrison, he decided to run a routine background check. Standard procedure when Marines get involved in civilian legal disputes. The complete absence of any military record for someone claiming extensive service raised immediate red flags." Tom stood up and began pacing, his military bearing more pronounced than I'd ever seen it. "Stolen valor isn't just a crime, it's a personal insult to everyone who actually served. This changes everything about how we approach the court case." "How so?" I asked. Patricia looked up from her notes with an expression of professional satisfaction. "Because now we're not just dealing with insurance fraud and property theft. We're dealing with a federal criminal who's been lying about military service while attempting to steal property from someone under Marine protection." She paused for effect. "Judges tend to take a very dim view of people who dishonor military service while committing other crimes." Mrs. Kim clapped her hands together with delight. "Bad husband get in much bigger trouble now?" "Much, much bigger trouble," Elena confirmed. "Military fraud is investigated by federal agencies, not local police. The penalties are severe, and the military takes these cases very seriously." Tom stopped pacing and turned to face our group with an expression I imagined had once struck fear into the hearts of subordinates who'd disappointed him. "There's something else we need to consider. If Marcus has been lying about military service, what else has he been lying about? We need to verify every claim he's made about everything." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "Elena, Can your contacts at Camp Mackenzie provide official documentation of the lack of military service? Something we can present in court. Already requested. I'll have certified documents by Monday confirming that no one named Marcus Morrison has ever served in the Marine Corps or any other military branch. Elena's efficiency was impressive even by Marine standards. I also took the liberty of contacting the federal investigators who handle stolen valor cases. They're very interested in examining Marcus's insurance business practices. I felt a strange combination of vindication and disbelief. The man I'd been married to for 8 years had been living a completely fabricated identity, using military service he'd never performed to build credibility for a business that was apparently built on multiple layers of fraud. There's more, Elena continued. When the investigators started looking into his business practices, they discovered that several of his insurance policies were sold to actual veterans. He was specifically targeting military families, using his fake service record to gain their trust. The room fell silent as the full scope of Marcus's betrayal became clear. He hadn't just stolen valor from those who'd served, he'd used that stolen honor to defraud the very people whose service he was claiming to share. Tom's voice, when he finally spoke, was deadly quiet. He targeted military families using fake credentials? At least a dozen documented cases. Veterans who trusted him because they thought he was a fellow Marine. Families who gave him their business because they believed he understood military life. Elena's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing the depth of her personal outrage. Some of these families lost substantial money when his policies turned out to be fraudulent or inadequate. Mrs. Kim shook her head sadly. Very bad man. Use honor of real soldiers to steal from other soldiers. Patricia was writing furiously, her legal mind clearly working through the implications. This gives us everything we need to not only win the property case but to ensure Marcus faces serious federal consequences. The court will have no choice but to rule against someone who's been lying about military service while attempting to steal property. What does this mean for the hearing next week? I asked. It means we're no longer playing defense, Tom replied with satisfaction. We're going on the offensive with overwhelming force. Elena nodded agreement. The federal investigators want to coordinate with local law enforcement to ensure Marcus is arrested immediately after the court hearing. They don't want to interfere with your property case, but they're ready to move on the stolen valor charges the moment it's resolved. I found myself laughing with a mixture of relief and disbelief. So Marcus thought he was stealing a house from a helpless ex-wife, but he's actually been committing federal crimes against the Marine Corps? That's exactly right, Patricia confirmed. And now he's about to face the consequences of every lie he's told and every law he's broken. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and coordination. Patricia worked with Elena's military contacts to ensure all documentation would be properly certified and admissible in court. Tom expanded his research to verify every claim Marcus had ever made about his background, discovering additional lies about his education, previous employment, and business credentials. Mrs. Kim coordinated with neighbors to provide witness testimony about my sole ownership and occupancy of the house. But it was Wednesday evening, 3 days before the court hearing, when we received the news that transformed our case from a property dispute into something much larger. Elena arrived at my house accompanied by Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a man whose presence seemed to command respect from furniture. His bearing suggested someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Ma'am, I'm Master Sergeant Rodriguez from Camp Mackenzie. I understand you're facing legal harassment from someone who's been impersonating a Marine. His voice carried the weight of institutional authority. I'm here to inform you that the Marine Corps considers attacks on military families and their allies to be attacks on the Corps itself. I looked around my living room, which had somehow become a command center for what felt like a military operation. Tom sat at attention. Elena maintained professional alertness. Patricia took notes with legal precision. And Mrs. Kim watched everything with the keen interest of someone who'd seen enough conflict to recognize when justice was about to be served. What does that mean practically? Patricia asked. It means the Marine Corps will be represented at your court hearing. We'll be providing official testimony about Marcus Morrison's fraudulent military claims and their impact on actual veterans. Master Sergeant Rodriguez's expression was granite hard. We'll also be coordinating with federal investigators to ensure he faces appropriate consequences for stolen valor and veteran fraud. Tom leaned forward with interest. The Corps is sending representatives to a civilian property dispute? The Corps is sending representatives to ensure that someone who's been dishonoring Marine service while defrauding Marine families faces justice. Rodriguez's clarification was significant. This stopped being just a property dispute when we discovered the scope of his fraud against military personnel. I felt a surreal sense of displacement. A week ago, I'd been a frightened woman facing a lawsuit from her ex-husband. Now I was apparently at the center of a federal investigation supported by official Marine Corps intervention. There's something else, Rodriguez continued. We've been in contact with some of the veteran families who were defrauded by Morrison's insurance schemes. Several of them want to attend the hearing to support you and to see justice served. Elena added, word has gotten out in the veteran community about what Marcus has been doing. There's a lot of anger about someone using fake military service to steal from real veterans and their families. Mrs. Kim nodded approvingly. Good. Military families stick together, help each other fight bad people. Patricia looked up from her notes with an expression of professional awe. Rachel, do you understand what this means? You're going to walk into that courtroom with official Marine Corps support, federal investigators, and a group of defrauded veterans all united against Marcus's fraudulent claims. It means Marcus Morrison picked the wrong person to mess with, Tom added with grim satisfaction. He thought he was intimidating an isolated woman. Instead, he declared war on the Marine Corps and the veteran community. Thursday evening brought our final preparation meeting. Patricia had transformed my dining room into a legal war room, with evidence organized in precise categories and witness statements arranged for maximum impact. The scope of documentation was staggering. Proof of Marcus's fake military service, evidence of his insurance fraud, records of his attempted property theft, and testimony from neighbors, co-workers, and defrauded veterans. The hearing tomorrow is going to be unlike anything Derek Morrison has ever experienced, Patricia said, with professional satisfaction. He's prepared to argue a simple property dispute. Instead, he's going to face a federal case involving stolen valor, veteran fraud, and attempted theft under military protection. Elena had brought additional documentation from Camp Mackenzie, including official statements from Marine Corps leadership about the seriousness of stolen valor crimes and their impact on military community trust. The paperwork was intimidating in its official gravity. How many people are planning to attend the hearing? I asked. Tom consulted his notes. Official count is 12 Marines from Camp Mackenzie, 6 defrauded veteran families, 8 neighbors who can testify about your property ownership, Patricia's legal team, federal investigators, and assorted court officials who've heard about the case and want to see justice served. Mrs. Kim giggled with anticipation. Bad husband, expect quiet little hearing. Get big crowd of angry military people instead. That's exactly right, Patricia confirmed. Derek Morrison filed what he thought was a routine intimidation lawsuit. Tomorrow he's going to discover that he's actually representing a federal criminal in front of a courtroom full of Marines. I spent Thursday night alternating between nervous excitement and surreal disbelief. The transformation from victim to the center of a military justice operation felt like something that happened to other people in movies, not to graphic designers from small North Carolina towns. Friday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect weather for what Patricia had begun calling, quote, Judgment Day. Elena arrived early to coordinate security. Tom appeared in his dress blues looking like a recruitment poster, and Mrs. Kim wore her late husband's Korean War service medals on a dress that suggested she understood the solemnity of the occasion. Patricia picked me up in a truck that could have hauled military equipment, her confidence radiating like heat from a furnace, ready to show Marcus Morrison what happens when he messes with Marines and their neighbors. As we drove toward Cumberland County Superior Court, I could see other vehicles converging on the courthouse from different directions. Military vehicles from Camp Mackenzie, cars carrying veteran families, and trucks that suggested Tom's Marine network was larger than I'd realized. Patricia, I said as we pulled into the courthouse parking lot, what if this is all too much? What if Marcus just gives up and drops the lawsuit? Patricia's smile was fierce with anticipation. Honey, it's way too late for Marcus to give up. He committed federal crimes, defrauded veterans, and tried to steal property from someone under Marine protection. Even if he wanted to withdraw the lawsuit, the federal investigators aren't going to let him walk away from the other charges. As we walked toward the courthouse entrance, I could see Marines in dress blues forming an unofficial honor guard, veteran families gathering in supportive clusters, and neighbors from Oak Ridge Drive arriving to witness the conclusion of a fight that had grown far beyond a simple property dispute. For the first time since that certified letter had arrived, I felt completely ready for whatever Marcus Morrison thought he was going to accomplish in court. The frightened, isolated woman he'd counted on intimidating no longer existed. In her place stood someone backed by the full weight of military justice and community support. Marcus was about to learn that some fights you simply cannot win. The courthouse steps looked like a scene from a military ceremony. Marines in dress blues stood at attention, while veteran families gathered in respectful clusters, their presence transforming what should have been a routine property hearing into something that felt like a tribunal. I walked through the center of this unexpected honor guard, feeling the weight of their support and the magnitude of what we were about to accomplish. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Court officials who normally handled mundane civil disputes found themselves managing what had become a federal case with military implications. The gallery filled quickly with an unusual mix of uniformed Marines, veteran families, neighborhood witnesses, and curious legal observers who'd heard about the stolen valor charges. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table looking increasingly pale as he realized the scope of attendance for what he'd expected to be a simple intimidation hearing. Beside him, Derek Morrison shuffled through papers with the frantic energy of someone who'd just discovered his client had lied about everything. Vanessa Sterling was notably absent, apparently having decided that association with Marcus's legal troubles was bad for her real estate reputation. Judge Hamilton entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who'd been thoroughly briefed on the unusual circumstances of this case. His expression suggested a man preparing to deliver justice rather than merely arbitrate a property dispute. The court calls the case of Morrison v. Morrison, property dispute concerning 1247 Oak Ridge Drive, Riverside, North Carolina. Judge Hamilton's voice carried unusual gravity as he surveyed the packed courtroom. Before we proceed with opening statements, I want to address the unusual nature of this hearing and the presence of federal investigators and military personnel. He turned toward Derek Morrison with an expression that suggested professional disappointment. Counselor, are you aware that your client has been the subject of federal investigation for stolen valor claims and veteran fraud? Derek Morrison stood shakily, clearly unprepared for this development. Your Honor, we're here today to address a property dispute regarding marital assets. Any other matters are outside the scope of this hearing. Actually, they're not. Judge Hamilton's correction was firm. When someone files a property lawsuit while under federal investigation for fraud, it becomes relevant to their credibility and the court's assessment of their claims. Patricia rose from our table with the confidence of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Your Honor, if I may, the defense would like to present evidence that directly relates to the plaintiff's credibility and the fraudulent nature of his property claims. Proceed, Counselor Hayes. Patricia walked to the center of the courtroom carrying a folder that contained the documentation we'd spent weeks assembling. Your Honor, the defense will prove that this lawsuit is not a legitimate property dispute but rather the latest in a series of fraudulent schemes perpetrated by a man who has built his entire adult life on lies. She opened the folder and began systematically destroying every claim Marcus had made. The evidence of his fake military service was devastating. Official statements from Camp McKenzie confirming no record of Marcus Morrison in any military database. Documentation of his use of fraudulent military credentials and business advertising, and testimony from defrauded veterans who trusted him because of his claimed service. Furthermore, Your Honor, we will demonstrate that the plaintiff's claim to property ownership is completely fabricated. Not only did Marcus Morrison have no financial involvement in purchasing the house at 1247 Oak Ridge Drive, he actively opposed the purchase and refused to participate in any aspect of the buying process. Patricia presented my employment records showing the overtime hours I'd worked to save for the down payment, bank statements documenting the gradual accumulation of funds in my private account, and the mortgage paperwork filled out solely in my name. The evidence was overwhelming and methodical, each document building an unshakable case for my sole ownership of the property. But it was when Patricia called Master Sergeant Rodriguez to testify that the courtroom atmosphere shifted from legal proceeding to military tribunal. Rodriguez walked to the witness stand with the bearing of someone representing institutional authority beyond the courtroom's jurisdiction. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, please explain to the court the Marine Corps position on stolen valor claims and their impact on military communities. Rodriguez's testimony was precise and devastating. He explained how stolen valor undermines trust between military personnel and civilian communities, how it dishonors the service of those who actually served, and how it enables fraud against vulnerable veteran families who extend trust based on claimed shared service. In the case of Marcus Morrison, Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying institutional weight, we have documented evidence of stolen valor being used to defraud at least 12 veteran families through fraudulent insurance schemes. The Marine Corps considers this not just a crime against military honor, but an attack on the families we've sworn to protect. Derek Morrison attempted to object, but Judge Hamilton cut him off with a look that suggested his patience was exhausted. Counselor, your client's credibility is directly relevant to this property dispute. The court will hear all evidence related to his character and truthfulness. Patricia then called Elena Vasquez to testify about the federal investigation into Marcus's business practices. Elena's testimony revealed the scope of Marcus's fraud: fake military credentials used in business advertising, fraudulent insurance policies sold to veteran families, and financial irregularities that suggested systematic theft from clients who trusted him based on his claimed military service. Master Sergeant Vasquez, in your professional opinion, is Marcus Morrison the type of person who would file a fraudulent property lawsuit to avoid bankruptcy and criminal prosecution? Based on the evidence we've gathered, yes. Marcus Morrison has demonstrated a pattern of using fraudulent claims and legal intimidation to obtain money and property he has no legitimate right to. When Patricia called me to testify, I walked to the witness stand, feeling the support of everyone who'd helped build our case. My testimony was straightforward and factual. The overtime hours I'd worked to save for the house, Marcus's opposition to the purchase, his absence from all aspects of the buying process, and his complete lack of financial contribution to the property. But it was when Patricia asked about Marcus's absence from my life since the divorce that the courtroom grew silent with attention. Mrs. Morrison, has your ex-husband shown any interest in the property at 1247 Oak Ridge Drive since your divorce was finalized? None whatsoever, until 3 weeks ago when I received the lawsuit. In fact, he explicitly told me during divorce negotiations that he wanted nothing to do with the house because he considered it a financial burden. Patricia then presented Mrs. Kim's surveillance photographs showing Marcus and Vanessa Sterling planning to sell my property before the lawsuit was even resolved. The premeditation was clear and damning. Mrs. Morrison, based on everything you've learned about your ex-husband's fraudulent military service and business practices, do you believe his property claim is legitimate? I believe Marcus filed this lawsuit because he's facing bankruptcy and criminal prosecution, and he thought he could intimidate me into giving him money to solve his problems. He was wrong. Derek Morrison's cross-examination was painful to watch. He attempted to question my memory of financial details, but Patricia's documentation made every challenge look desperate and frivolous. When he tried to suggest that Marcus's military service claims were irrelevant to property ownership, Judge Hamilton's expression made it clear that line of argument was unwelcome. Derek Morrison then made the mistake of calling Marcus to testify in his own defense. Marcus walked to the witness stand with obvious reluctance, and Patricia's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Mr. Morrison, under oath, did you serve in the United States Marine Corps from 2008 to 2012? Marcus's hesitation was answer enough, but his eventual no sent a ripple of satisfaction through the veteran families in the gallery. Did you deploy to Afghanistan twice as a Marine Corps logistics specialist? No. Did you receive commendations for exceptional service under combat conditions? No. So your entire military service record, as advertised in your business materials and claimed to veteran clients, is completely fabricated? It was a marketing strategy. The contempt in Patricia's voice was audible. You consider stolen valor a marketing strategy? Judge Hamilton intervened before Derek Morrison could object. "The witness will answer the question." "Yes," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Patricia then systematically destroyed his property claims. Under oath, Marcus was forced to admit that he'd contributed no money to purchasing the house, had opposed the purchase, hadn't participated in house hunting or mortgage applications, and had specifically disclaimed any interest in the property during divorce proceedings. "Mr. Morrison, why are you claiming ownership of property you had no involvement in purchasing and specifically rejected during your divorce?" Marcus's answer was the final nail in his coffin. "I need the money." Judge Hamilton's ruling was swift and comprehensive. He dismissed Marcus's property claim with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. He awarded me attorney's fees and damages for harassment. But most satisfying was his statement, for the record, about Marcus's character and credibility. This court finds that Marcus Morrison has demonstrated a pattern of fraudulent behavior that calls into question every claim he has made. His use of stolen valor to defraud veteran families is particularly reprehensible and undermines any credibility he might claim in legal proceedings. But Judge Hamilton wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is referring this case to federal prosecutors for investigation of perjury charges related to Mr. Morrison's testimony today, in addition to the existing stolen valor and fraud investigations. As Judge Hamilton concluded the hearing, federal investigators moved to arrest Marcus on charges of stolen valor, veteran fraud, and perjury. The sight of Marcus being led away in handcuffs while Marines and veteran families watched with satisfaction was more cathartic than I'd expected. Derek Morrison approached Patricia with obvious desperation. "Counselor Hayes, perhaps we could discuss a settlement arrangement." Patricia cut him off with professional ice. "There's nothing to discuss. Your client attempted to steal property through fraudulent legal claims while impersonating a Marine and defrauding veterans. The only settlement he'll be discussing is with federal prosecutors." Outside the courthouse, the Marines formed an informal receiving line to congratulate me on the victory. Master Sergeant Rodriguez presented me with a certificate recognizing me as an honorary friend of the Marine Corps for standing up to someone who dishonored military service. "Ma'am, you've done something important here today. You've shown that stolen valor has consequences, and that the Marine Corps stands behind those who support our community." Mrs. Kim hugged me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you. You fight like real warrior, show bad husband what happened when he pick wrong person to bully." Tom appeared beside me with an expression of paternal pride. "Rachel, you've come a long way from the frightened woman who opened that lawsuit letter 3 weeks ago." He was right. The transformation felt both gradual and sudden, like discovering muscles I'd always had but never used. Marcus's attempt to steal my house had revealed strengths I'd never known I possessed, and introduced me to a community I'd never imagined being part of. Patricia gathered our team for a final debrief at the courthouse steps. "Marcus Morrison is looking at significant federal prison time. Stolen valor carries up to a year in federal prison. Veteran fraud can result in decades of sentences, and perjury adds additional penalties. He won't be bothering anyone for a very long time." "What about his cousin Derek?" I asked. "Derek Morrison is facing ethics violations for filing frivolous lawsuits and failing to properly investigate his client's claims. His law license is in serious jeopardy." Patricia's satisfaction was evident. Sometimes, justice includes consequences for enablers, as well as perpetrators. 6 months later, I was working in my garden when Mrs. Kim appeared with news and her usual plate of cookies. Marcus had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for stolen valor and veteran fraud, with additional time for perjury. Derek Morrison had lost his law license and was facing his own criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. The veteran families who'd been defrauded received restitution from Marcus's seized assets, though it couldn't fully compensate for the trust that had been violated. Several of them had become regular visitors to Oak Ridge Drive, creating an extended community of military families who looked out for each other. Tom had retired from his consulting work and devoted himself full-time to helping other veterans who faced legal or financial intimidation. He'd partnered with Patricia to create a pro bono legal clinic specifically for military families dealing with fraud or harassment. Elena and Mike had completed their deployments and settled in Riverside, forming the core of what had become an informal veteran support network. My house had somehow become the unofficial headquarters for Marines and their families, who needed help navigating civilian legal challenges. As for me, I'd discovered that standing up to a bully who thought military service could be faked and property could be stolen through intimidation had revealed strengths I'd never known I possessed. The frightened woman who'd opened that lawsuit letter no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood that real strength comes from community, that justice requires courage, and that Marines really do take care of their own and their neighbors. The house Marcus had tried to steal remained my sanctuary, but it had become something more, a gathering place for people who understood that some fights are worth having and some victories are worth celebrating with the people who helped make them possible. Every morning when I looked out my kitchen window, I could see Tom in his workshop, Mrs. Kim tending her garden, and Marines coming and going as they helped other veterans with their own battles. Marcus had tried to isolate and intimidate me, but instead he'd introduced me to a community I'd never leave. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, surrounded by people who understand the value of honor, courage, and taking care of each other. Marcus Morrison had taught me that lesson in the most unexpected way possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.